about water and urban places. This is Ideanthro. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ideanthro. I'm in Sydney, and in this episode, I'm going to show you a really nice rain garden. And then, having shown you that rain garden, in fact, here it is, having shown you that rain garden, we are going to discuss two things that sprang to my mind based on that. We are going to make some observations about what it means, how we need to be aware of cognitive biases when we're viewing anything water sensitive that we see that is either positive or negative, trying to assess how well we're doing on this water sensitive journey. So we're going to discuss a bit about that inspired by this rain garden. And then we're going to go a little bit more technical, a little bit more straight down the line and go, well, actually, why does this rain garden look so good? What made this a nice looking rain garden? So the first of these, something that I'm struck with. This isn't the first time I've spoken about this. I don't actually know if I've spoken about this on Ideanthro before, but I've definitely made a conference paper before, is I noticed at some point in the past that very often, actually, let me tell you why it's relevant to me today. So late last week, I was in Sydney. A fellow was showing me around a few sites, showing me some really cool stuff. But in the process, we got talking about failed rain gardens. And he was like, look, around here, there's a whole bunch of rain gardens that have failed. Got talking about them. He's like, jump in my car. I'll drive you around. I'll show you them. He took me to one. Yeah, it's got some problems. Took me to another. Yeah, it's got some problems. And then we kind of kept driving around. We were like, wait, that one's not doing so, like that one's doing better. It's not perfect, but it's doing better. So is that one. And this reminded me of something. I have noticed in the past, our tendency for us in trying to assess what's good or bad about water sensitive urban design, sometimes we swing to the extremes of like, it's either all bad or it's all good or, and it's worth delving into, particularly in this instance, the bad side of this, why it's so easy to get caught up looking at and focusing on the stuff that's not doing well and to forget about the stuff that is doing well. Because this is, and I will look at this from the other side as well, but this is rooted in in neuroscience here. So here's the thing. Human beings are fundamentally problem-solving animals, right? We are fundamentally programmed to identify threats and to find out ways, as most animals, like as all animals are actually, really, but to identify threats and then to find out ways to avoid them. So imagine that you're a prehistoric hunter-gatherer somewhere. You're walking through the African savannah and there's a tiger. We are programmed to notice threats like that in order to keep us alive. It is a very important survival instinct. The amygdala is the part of the brain that identifies threats and brings them to our attention. And when it does it, it overtakes and overwhelms every other thought that we are having at the time. And it directs our attention to that so that we can solve that problem, keep ourselves alive, and then move on with life. So you imagine a situation where you're this hunter-gatherer walking through the African savannah, and there is a beautiful sunset and a tiger, a lion. African savannah, I suspect a lion is more appropriate here. Which are you going to pay attention to? Of course, the lion. We are programmed to notice these threats and to then respond to them. The problem is, you move to modern life and you move to something like water-sensitive urban design. The reality is a failed rain garden isn't quite as much of an immediate threat as the lion is. And yet, because we are programmed to notice things that aren't quite right, that aren't going well, we have this habit of latching onto them and focusing on them, and then kind of overlooking and forgetting the stuff that's doing quite well. The stuff that's doing good just blends in and gets overlooked, but the stuff that's going bad grabs our attention. And so then what it means, and this is where it's a cognitive bias, is that it's really hard to make informed, without actually going out and collecting data really specifically, it's really hard to make informed decisions about how well are we doing or how not well are we doing in this case. And to give you an example of how this is used in mainstream society, in the newspaper business, there's a saying. The saying is, and honestly, it's an awful saying, but it's real. The saying is, if it bleeds, it leads. And what that means is, if it's grotesque, nasty, gory, scary, or otherwise bad news that lights up your amygdala, we're going to stick it on the front page because it's going to grab your attention and it's going to sell the paper. Far more than positive news. Like you'll say, like just have a think about all the newspaper headlines you've seen recently. How often, like you'll occasionally see one about the local football team that's just won the grand final. That's good news. But more often they're about crises, deaths, terrorism, all sorts of really nasty stuff. And this is because the newspaper industry knows that threats get the attention of our amygdala and grab us, and it sells more. But in water-sensitive urban design, what it means is that we are more likely to notice the bad stuff and overlook the good stuff, particularly then when you consider that the bad stuff stands out and the good stuff just tends to blend in and is easily overlooked. Like this little rain garden in Sydney that I saw here, from a distance, it's really hard to actually tell that it's even a rain garden. So you imagine if you're walking down the street here, and let's actually imagine you're walking down the street and there is a bad looking rain garden on one side and there's this good looking rain garden on the other. Which one are you going to notice? You're going to notice the bad one. Now, maybe if you look around, you might then be like, that good thing over the other side is also a rain garden. But the point is, the bad stuff sticks in our mind. And we need to be aware of that because it has consequences when we're assessing, okay, how well are we doing? What should we do next? How do we go on? It's the importance of collecting stats on how well we're doing in this space. I know of a local government that had a perception about a particular type of stormwater treatment asset that was really, really troublesome for them. And then when they created their asset register, they first identified that they knew that they had way more of this type of asset than they thought. So they had some problems with it. They had quite a few problems with assets of this type, but they made an asset register. And then they realized in the process that they had way more of this asset type than they thought. But they were like, oh, okay, well, it really is a big problem. Then they went out and looked at the condition of them. And what they found was that the vast majority of them were in really quite good condition. And it was really only a handful of those assets that had been in poor condition. And this is exactly the point. This is exactly a case of this, where the poor condition asset gets the attention and all the good ones just blended in and got overlooked. There was, in this instance, so much attention given to the small proportion of the asset base that was in poor condition, that this local government actually wrote provisions into their planning scheme to prevent this entire type of asset being constructed. And it was only in hindsight that they were like, ooh, actually, percentage-wise, that's probably our best condition type of water-sensitive urban design asset. Ooh, we better rethink that. So this is a cautionary tale. Now, I did promise at the start of this that I'd also look at this from the other side. There are, of course, cognitive biases that work the other way. So I've described ones that make us more likely to focus on poor performing systems, but it can go the other way. Confirmation bias is a real cognitive bias that essentially means that when you're posed with a situation that you have to some degree already got an opinion on, confirmation bias is when we are presented with further information about that idea, that we pay more attention to the information that supports our existing beliefs and tend to just push to the side the information that doesn't support our existing beliefs. So if I'm someone, which I am, who's really passionate about water-sensitive urban design, and I fell into this trap earlier on in my career, and I may still be falling into this trap now, to be honest, but I'm someone who's passionate about water-sensitive urban design, and so I really want it to work. So therefore, when confronted with information about how well or how poorly it's doing, confirmation bias is something that I have to watch out for, because it means I'm at risk of paying far more attention to the information that supports my belief in water-sensitive urban design is a good thing to do, and to push to the side any information that doesn't support that. So cognitive biases are something that can work both ways, but seeing a really nice and beautifully integrated rain garden like this after my experience the other day in Sydney, it was a good opportunity for us to talk about it. So that's point one, being aware of cognitive biases and how they affect our decision making in this space. So, what made this rain garden look quite good? Well, for me, there's a couple of things going on here. The first item here is I know that when I spot rain gardens and distinguish them from normal garden beds often, one of the things that jumps out at me in this space is depth. So if you're walking down the street and the garden bed that you're approaching is, flush with the curb, or maybe even a little bit raised where tree roots have pushed it up over time, it's pretty clear that it's a rain garden. It's pretty clear that it's a normal garden. Whereas if you see a garden bed that's sunken down, there's a far higher chance that it's a rain garden. So the first thing that I like about this system here, and that sunken down often creates a slightly awkward look to the landscape because it's incongruent with what we expect. We expect the garden bed, we expect continuity of surface level. So when we see it, it looks out of place. Even if there's actually nothing fundamentally wrong with that, it looks out of place. So the first thing that I liked about this rain garden and there's actually a couple on this intersection here, that I liked about this and that made it look good to me, is the fact that that drop is well disguised. So because of these shrubby type species that are in with it, the drop, you can't actually see the drop until you get quite close to it. So from any sort of distance like this shot here, it looks pretty much like a normal garden bed. The other element that ties into that is filling out of the space, so not leaving any gaps. So what I'd like you to compare now is this system that I've showed you so far with one on the opposite street corner here, which now, I will grant you, looks like it's only just been planted, but it has been planted with different species. Look at the difference between the rain garden I showed you, actually another small one right next to it, also pretty good, and then on the opposite corner, one that hasn't been filled out, different species, not shrubby species, hasn't filled out. Look at how much less nice that looks. Look at how much barer it looks. Look at how it hasn't filled out. Now, part of the other thing here is the fact that this is incongruent with its surrounding landscape. All the landscaping around this is like green and shrubby and bushy and treey and nice. And suddenly we've got this like xeriscaped, whatever the heck it is going on here. Maybe if we were somewhere, desert-like and barren. Maybe we're in Texas. I actually haven't been to Texas. I might be stereotyping there. This is what I imagine Texas to be like. Maybe if we were somewhere, inhospitable and desert-like, maybe this would fit in and be congruent with it. But in this instance, what we have is a lovely, lush suburb where all the rest of the landscape around here is lovely and lush. And we've got this open space. Its look is incongruent, but it's also got the depth element to it that's not well disguised. And it doesn't fit in well. And an element that plays into this is the type of plant selection. So look here. In the first system that we've got these shrubby type species that have grown up, they've spread a little bit, they can fill in gaps, they cut off some of our site down into the system, and they've generally just filled it up nicely. And then in the second system, we've got these tufted species that aren't growing out to fill the space, aren't filling it up. So there's an element here of species selection, where I think it's important to get species that can grow and fill in the gaps. And to make a point that this isn't just about bioretention systems, let's have a look at the streetscape gardens that just a little bit further up this same street here. On the one hand, we have this garden. So both gardens are going to have trees in them. Both gardens have some strappy plants in them. But in this first garden, what we have is like a prostrate kind of creeping setup here. And it's filled out the space nicely. It's clearly very vigorous because it's been hedged by the local maintenance teams, it would seem. But it's been hedged, it's filled it out nicely, it looks really good. We go across the other side of the road, however, and we see a system that doesn't have that spreading, that prostrate form plant. It does have the tree, it does have the strappy leaf plants, but they haven't filled in the space. So what we have is a bare space. So this is analogous. The comparison between the garden bed that's full versus the garden bed that's empty is analogous to the rain garden that's full to the rain garden that's empty. The problem here is that in all these instances, it's these kind of strappy leafed plants that aren't really able to fill the spots up quite as well. And the big problem there is that so many of our stock standard rain garden plants are of the strappy leaf variety. Every time I see a rain garden that's done really nice, not every time, that's incorrect. That was a bias. But very often when I see rain gardens that are done nicely, it's because there's varieties of plantings that allow it to fill in. You've got things that can fill in the different niches. We've got different levels. Sure, we've got some of these strappy plants. Sure, we've got lomandras. That's all good. But we've also got shrubby types like we're seeing in this nice rain garden here. And it all can fill up really nicely. And so I think that's an important lesson that this rain garden illustrates for us. Okay, that's the episode. Enjoy these little rain gardens in Sydney. In fact, I will add them to the Worcester map. I will flash up on the screen what the asset number is here. You can find the Worcester map at www.ideanthro.com/the-Worcester-map. If you want to go check those out, they will be up on there at that asset number that flashed up. Cool. That's it. Thank you for tuning in. Be aware of cognitive biases. Look out for things that make rain gardens good and replicate them. And that's the episode. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Before you go, our best episodes come from your questions. This knowledge base, these discussions that are Ideanthro improve with your contribution. So if there's a topic, an idea, a concept that you would like us to explore, come and ask us. You know where to find us. www.ideanthro.com/contact. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and that place you get your good podcasts from. You know where to find us. We look forward to hearing from you. We'll see you soon.